This is what college football will look like in 2030. We've long feared the super conference in college football, yet here we are in 2025 with two conferences running all of college football. That's the Big Ten and the SEC. And we're seeing them use their power to change the college football playoff format for 2026 and beyond. And that may seem quaint when we get to the end of this decade because in 2031, there will be a new media rights deal for the college football playoff. And we're already seeing teams positioning for that eventuality. And we're going to see the SEC and the Big Ten continue to wield their power to bring all of the relevant teams in the country under their umbrellas so that they can have all the biggest games, make all the money, and have all the power when it comes to discussions about the formats and who's in and who's not. So let's just take a look at realistically what college football will look like from a conference realignment standpoint come 2030 with all this on the horizon. Let's start with the big boys. We'll go with the SEC because this is the easiest one to predict. And it's going to look a little messy when you see this. But we go Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Auburn, South Carolina, Miami, Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, Clemson, Florida, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Missouri, Arkansas, LSU, Georgia Tech, and Ole Miss. So of course we see Clemson and Florida State added, and they're part of that kind of elite group of both 50,000 seats, and they have some of the biggest stadiums in the country, as well as 1 million viewers over each of the last 4 seasons. And they're obviously two of the strongest brands in college football, Florida State being strong forever, Clemson having a great run in the 2010s and still being a great team, playoff team last season. And then you see the other two teams added from the ACC with Miami and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is the one that might not make it in. I don't think that they're absolutely leapt for, but I do think that these two big conferences are going to want to get to 20. And I think that they want that power to wield as much mass as possible. And Georgia Tech is a strong brand, if not one of the strongest in the country, but they're, a super old college football brand. They're in Atlanta. It does bring some cachet with it. So I think that they would be a good add for the SEC. Of the current teams in the SEC that you might see fall out, obviously Vanderbilt is the weakest brand, but they've been there since the beginning. They've been there. They are part of the SEC culture. I think that they bring more maybe outside of football, but these conferences are not only football. As much as it seems like they have been with the moves over the last couple seasons and even going back to the 2010s, they are not just football. And with these predictions, we have to keep that in mind. The other team would be maybe Missouri, because they are one of the newer ads. They, came over in the 2010s, and they don't have the strongest brand. They're definitely one of the weaker brands in the SEC. I think that, you could see something with that, but I wouldn't predict it because even if you're one of the weaker brands in the SEC, you're still a strong brand. They still, I think, go to any of the two lower conferences, and they are the linchpin of that conference. So I think that they'll stick around, and they've obviously had success in the SEC, if not, playoff success. They still have had relative success in the SEC. So that's the 20 teams I would predict for the SEC. The Big Ten is more complicated because it's such a spread out conference at this point. And I think that really they're just trying to get anybody in the north of relevance. So with that in mind, let's take a look at who the Big Ten would be adding here. So we've got Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Oregon, BYU, Penn State, Michigan State, Minnesota, Washington, Colorado, Utah, USC, Nebraska, Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, Northwestern, Iowa, UCLA, and Maryland. So the first thing to point out is that in my prediction, I think the Big Ten is going to drop Rutgers. They were obviously added in the 2010 cycle, and I think this might be a mutual thing because Rutgers might be able to make more money and be closer to kind of geographic rivals in the ACC. We'll talk about that later. But Rutgers was kind of brought in to bring in the New York TV market, and it just hasn't happened. Rutgers is just not relevant anywhere because there's so much else going on in New York. Now, Maryland, you could make a similar argument, but they've had seasons where they've shown to be relevant. Northwestern obviously is the weakest brand, but Northwestern's been a part of the Big Ten since 1896. They're not going anywhere. They've made a commitment to sports. They're putting a lot of money into the new stadium. They might always be the weakest brand, probably will always be the weakest brand, but I think that they have a spot in the Big Ten forevermore. Now, the teams that are added, we went with 3 teams. 1 team out, 3 teams in. And it's kind of a mountain thing. BYU, Utah, and Colorado are the ones that we added in, all from the Big 12. BYU is probably the strongest brand outside of Clemson and Florida State that's not currently in the Big 10 or the ACC. BYU was pulling in 1 million viewers a season in the Mountain West. That is, you cannot scoff at that. In the Mountain West, they were pulling in 1 million viewers a season. Now they're in the Big 12, that number has gone up more, and they are showing to be one of the most willing programs to spend in basketball and football. They spent all that money on AJ DeBansa. They're spending on non-Mormon athletes. They want to be relevant in national conversation. People could talk shit about whatever, the 1984 national championship. They won that. They've had great quarterbacks coming out of BYU for the history. They are a relevant team in college football, and this makes sense. This makes sense that they would go after them. Now, if you go after BYU, you're most likely going to go after Utah because you want the Holy War as a conference game. Utah had success in the Pac-12, obviously, and while the Big 12 season wasn't as successful, they're a strong program in both football and basketball. That's a team that you want in the Big 12 or in the Big 10. Colorado is the most interesting one because Colorado allowed their program to fall to such a low place during the years in the Pac-12 that the 2 seasons before Deion Sanders got there, they were averaging like 300,000 viewers a game. That's terrible. That is like in the 70s as far as where that's they're that's Sunbelt level averages. In the 2 seasons since Deion Sanders has been there, they've gone over 4 million the first season and just slightly under 4 million this last season. Those are top 5, top 10 numbers in the country. We're 10x, 12x the amount of viewers that they had. That's crazy. And in all actuality, they went down in conference in the second season and still were almost 4 million, almost in the top 5 in the country as far as average viewers. Now, so much of that is tied to Deion and obviously Travis Hunter and Shador to a lesser extent. It'll be interesting to see if they can keep that up this season, but I can't imagine it's going to drop below, top 15, top 20. Anytime you make a video about Colorado, people are shitting on you if you don't like them because so many people feel a connection to that program. But I think that it makes sense for them to add these 3 teams. Maybe they keep Rutgers and don't add one of these teams or whatever it is, but this would be my prediction for the Big 10 come 2030. Okay, so that leaves 2 conferences that were stripped down from the next conference realignment, and that's kind of what has been the theme. So let's look at what's left over in those 2 conferences, starting with the ACC. So we got Louisville, Pitt, Duke, Syracuse, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, NC State, UConn, UNC, Boston College, Virginia, Rutgers, Army, and Navy. So for this, Army and Navy are actually affiliate members. That's what they're doing with the American currently, and I think that's what they'll do with the ACC. And I think that what you're going to see here is kind of a northward shift for the ACC, obviously losing Clemson, Georgia Tech, Florida State, and Miami. They are basically cleared out of anything below North Carolina. And then we're adding the Rutgers. UConn is also probably going to be an affiliate member. They want to stay in the Big East. They're an independent now, but I don't imagine with UMass added to the MAC, I think starting next season, or maybe they started this season, there's basically 2 independent schools. There's Notre Dame and UConn. And obviously UConn doesn't hold, even though I'm wearing this Connecticut shirt, UConn doesn't hold the same cachet that Notre Dame does. So they have a pretty solid college football program. I think that they'll do fine in the ACC. The ACC is not super strong in this setup, but I think that they need to get into a conference to have somebody kind of leading the way for them. Same thing, Army and Navy do good numbers. They are the strongest current G5 programs, even over Boise State, just as far as numbers. And obviously they have that connection Both of them have a connection with Notre Dame, which is helpful. And then they have, built-in audience, like the Navy, the Army. Like those are big factions in the country, right? So, and they're well-known brands and very classic in college football. So I think that they would be smart ads for the ACC. And really, when you get down to it, there's not much. We could be looking at Tulane. You could be looking at, kind of raiding the American. There's a lot of North Carolina teams in the ACC. There's a lot of North Carolina teams in the Sun Belt currently. I mean, that's going. You're talking App State, Coastal Carolina. These are teams that are relatively new to FBS. So I don't think that the ACC wants to be going that far down. I think that if they can find a happy place at 12 teams, I think that's what we're going to start to see out of these second level conferences. I've said that the Big 12 is in a better spot than the ACC because they don't have those top end programs that they're not going to be able to hold on to. Now, you'll see they're going to lose a little bit here as well, like we talked about, but this is what we got for the Big 12. Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor, SMU, Arizona State, West Virginia, Arizona, Kansas, Kansas State, UCF, Iowa State, Cincinnati, Houston. Okay, so if the Big 12 ends up losing those three mountain teams, I think that they're going to make a big push for SMU. Now, in my last video, I talked about the Pac-12 really would be a great place for SMU, but I think if you're the Big 12, if you get down to 11 teams or 12 teams, whatever it ends up being, you are going to make a push for SMU because Texas is the power state in college football. I mean, you could talk about Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio, whatever. Texas is the strongest state. And if you can have SMU, Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor, Houston, there's money there. There's big teams there. And they might go down to add some of the smaller teams. But I think just adding SMU to this and adding a team in Dallas to what they already have, that really can solidify this conference in the sense of the sub-power three that we've been talking about. The Arizona schools are not strong viewership schools, even though they're some of the biggest schools in the country, but they do bring something. And I think that this conference, as you look at it, is a great college basketball conference. Arizona, Kansas, Baylor, West Virginia has been great. Houston has gone to the Final Four, I think, a couple times recently. So there's a lot of... Cincinnati has been a great basketball school. So there's a lot to like if you're the Big 12 here. Now, again, they're not a Power 2 conference, but I think that if they are a part of this sub-Power 2, sub-Power 3, whatever the second rung of conferences is called, they might be the strongest. I think that they have a great setup here if they can keep this together. But, we'll see. Okay, this is the last conference I'm going to go through. And I just want to talk about where we're at with the Pac-12, right? They added Texas State. They're at 8 teams currently, and I think that they have talked about a want to add more teams, specifically teams with a quote-unquote Mississippian profile is what they've been looking for. Now, that's a lot of teams in the Sun Belt. And a story that we had came out today, which is Monday is when I'm shooting this, that Memphis supposedly told the Big 12 that they were going to get together $200 million if they would be allowed to join the conference. And it's not that they were going to sign a check for $200 million. They were going to pull together sponsorships for the conference that would add an additional $200 million if Memphis was allowed to join the Big 12. That was declined because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to hold up on it. Probably wouldn't. But Memphis is a somewhat relevant program. And what that shows, that combined with the Americans' sweeping rebrand that was also announced today, where now they're not the American Athletic Conference, but they're the American Conference, and they have a logo and all this stuff, shows that what the Pac-12 has done over the last 2 years, pulling together a conference out of their ass, mind you, combined with this media rights thing, this change college football playoff format changes coming up at the end of this year, and the media rights coming towards the end of the decade, there is panic among these group of 5, group of 6 conferences to cobble, and the schools in those conferences to cobble something together so they can stay relevant in college football. College basketball, I think, is going to keep a lot of these teams afloat, but college football is changing so much. keep that all in mind as we go through the Pac-12 here. So for the Pac-12, we got Texas State, Cal, Stanford, Washington State, Boise State, Utah State, San Diego State, Tulane, Memphis, Fresno State, Colorado State, and Oregon State. So I want to start by saying I think that this conference layout is stupid. I don't like that with whatever Oregon State and Washington State have done to pull this conference together, they're going to have to keep going further and further east to keep expanding this conference. Now, obviously, the big thing here is that they add Cal and Stanford if the ACC does, in fact, fall apart. And it makes sense for Cal and Stanford to want to play in the Pac-12 as opposed to the Big 12 or whatever people have been suggesting, because Cal and Stanford aren't really that relevant in college football right now. And I don't think that there's a direct path for them to be relevant anytime soon. But they are schools that have so many programs. And a lot of them are Olympic programs and women's programs, and going back and forth across the country just so that you could also play football with those teams isn't going to make sense when you have to cut these programs. And they're not going to do that. They're not going to cut the program. I think that they're going to find ways to continue to play those games with teams that are closer. And this makes more sense. Obviously, there's points where you have to go to Tulane or Memphis or Texas, whatever it may be. But there's much, much more realistic travel times for non-football sports, even for football sports, in this Pac-12 layout. But with Tulane and Memphis, the writing's on the wall. We saw what Memphis tried to do. We see what the American is making a desperate attempt to stay relevant. And I just don't think that they're going to be able to stave off, if it's not the Pac-12, the Big 12, or the ACC, to take whatever they can possibly get as far as these scraps, because they've been thrown on the scrap heap. The Pac-12 was dead. They've come back, and I think that they're going to continue to come back. They're in a strong position to continue to come back and at least be alive. That's it. At least be alive and be somewhat relevant. But this is college football, and I don't know. I'm trying to come around to this and just take it as what it is. We have no control over it. It's bullshit. We have no control over it. You can stop watching, but let's be honest. If you're watching this video in late July, you're not stopping watching college football. That's fine. You got to also recognize that this is kind of what it's always been, right? It's an ever-changing thing, more so than any other sport. More so because there's so many cooks in the kitchen. There's so many differing goals. And even if they all have the same goal, there's so many different people, so many different vessels. There's so many different ways to get there and there's not one overarching body, that this is what it's going to be. And I think that, as we get closer to whatever it is that it's going towards, that's not the final form. This 2030 thing is not the final form. And it might go back the other way. Who knows? I think that it's, at this point, not a quirk, but a feature of college football. That the landscape is ever changing. Your team might be relevant one minute and it won't be the next. And these ADs and boosters and whatever, they need to recognize that really what is being said here is that if you don't take football seriously, you won't be taken seriously. That's it. And I think that there are more and more teams that are recognizing that. I think BYU is recognizing that very much so. They had their high in the 80s, dropped down, and they've come back up, especially over these last couple of years. SMU recognized that. Texas Tech is recognizing that. Not every team can do that. But there are different ways now to become a relevant program, to find money, than ever before. And if you don't exhaust your options, you will be left behind. And that's just the sad truth of it. Hopefully your team takes it seriously. Thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe. And if you made it this far, leave a comment. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of views about this one. So leave a comment. Let me know what you think. And put this in College Football 26. See if it works. But really, this is more of the realistic side of things. If you want to watch more of my videos, I do have those for you. So this is kind of a sequel to the video I did last week, which is what will the Pac-12 do next? So check that one out there if you like it. 2 weeks ago, I came out with a video that's been quite popular, so check this one out. This is the perfect Power 5 for college football 26. Make sure you check that one out and let me know what you think. Other than that, I've got my subscribe link on this side here, and we will check it next time. See ya!